Hello everyone. So, what do we do? Where is OBS now? Okay, let's wait for just someone to join and confirm. Till then, I will just schedule one more stream. Episode 6. So, people have been asking what happened to this series, this, that. So, this week we'll have the next episode. Don't worry, Let's Learn ERP Next won't stop before a dozen episodes at least. So we have YT assets. Let's pick this thumbnail 6. Export it. Eat a sandwich with a sand. So let's save it to the downloads. Enjoy your sandwich, Alberto. Episode 6. This will be scheduled for Wednesday. 6:30, 6:30, 6:30, 6:30. Cool. Also, let me just copy this link, add it to stream list. Let's Learn ERP Next episode 6. So now this will also show. Okay, this shouldn't be called item master. Continued. For now I can call it continued. Cool. 34 and 35 we need to add here, but fine, I will add it later. Okay. Yeah, so yesterday what did we do? We did custom webhook listener. That was like the major feature that we did yesterday. Then we refactored our some stuff to use this abstract base class, right, to get autocomplete and also to get an error if that is not the case. Similarly, we have log webhook and pass request, like so. That was the doc type. Webhook, Hazel webhook log. If you recall that we were now logging the request and also passing it as context to the workflow. That is what we did. What else did we do? We added a validation. This was like very last minute. We added a validation that like the listener should point to a unique workflow, right? Don't workflow if not. Okay, commit messages, ignore. This I did behind the scenes today, just 4 hours ago. So if the workflow is not enabled, just return, don't execute anything. That was the whole thing. But yeah, let's go back, go back. And so let's open up notes. So today's agenda is to refactor trigger in some way, right? So how will triggers work? Action nodes are fine. They take some stuff, execute. So let me just close Figma. Where is VS Code? Let me open up VS Code. And if you see one of the action nodes, right? So this is an action node which executes, right? But okay, let's remove this. For now we can leave it because this is not executed yet. But the trigger points, right? Trigger points can be anything. So yesterday we implemented one trigger point, which was webhook handler, right? and we implemented this that ultimately executes a workflow, right? um, but I don't know, this is not generic enough. We are just calling the workflow, and then inside the workflow, right, inside the Hazel workflow.py, we are just ignoring the first node. So I don't know, it doesn't feel right to me. So we can separate nodes and trigger. So that was my idea in refactoring this. So let's brainstorm a bit before we start there. So currently there are nodes, right, which will be all action nodes now, right? And then there will be one trigger, right? We also added validation yesterday, that we might need to remove that. That's fine. So one trigger, and that trigger can be, let's take some examples. Yesterday we did webhook listener, right? Document event. What else? What else we want to ship with the base stuff? Let's check. Scheduler event. So this 3 we want to ship on day 1. Cron. But what about third party triggers? Right? This can be very useful. Suppose to create a Raven bot. So the Raven team is working on a bots feature, which will basically be a server script. But here I'm just taking it as an example because it's a good example, right? When something happens, we want to trigger a workflow, and this can be outside this 3, right? Some custom app can bring whenever a salary slip is generated, that particular node, and then trigger a workflow, right? So that should be possible, bringing third party triggers. So how to implement that, right? We implemented that thing, the action thing for third parties using this node type, and we said if you want to implement it, just give us the handler path, right? Dotted path to the handler class. So we have to do something like that, but I don't know what yet. So what is a listener? Listeners. So webhook listeners triggers a workflow. This will trigger a workflow. This will also trigger a workflow. So all of them are triggering a workflow, right? But how can we store this information in the workflow? So I was thinking we can maybe start a field, like create a field trigger, right? That is mandatory. Without the trigger, there is no workflow. Mandatory if at least one node. If there is an action, there should be a trigger. That's it. If there are no nodes, then that is fine. Maybe they are experimenting with the workflow. That's fine. And that trigger field, right? That field will be what? Link field, right? One-to-one mapping. That is one trigger, one workflow. The second thing is, this is tricky. So suppose, let's take an example. I want to attach the webhook listener here, right? So user selects a trigger. It appears like a node. So the first one, right? Let's jump to the UI and see. I'll show you what I mean. So the first one, it shows trigger, right? It will be the trigger field. So they can choose from one of the triggers we have available. So to begin with, there will be just 3 triggers: document event, webhook listener that we implemented yesterday, and scheduler cron. I don't think this will be complicated, but yeah. So how do we do that now? So how do we do this mapping? That's the case, right? Because if I were to do just this three, I can easily do it. Hmm. Can we use dynamic link? So dynamic link will be two field, dynamic link, and then a link field for that doc type. So this will be doc type, and this will be the document, right? So in this case, the link will be from webhook listener and one any ABCDEFG listener, right? So in this case, this database modeling works. How about document event? Let's see. Dynamic link. Okay, let's not copy paste. In that case, the doc type will be, we have to create listener. What is this? Listener. Doc type will be document event, and then it can be the event itself. So on update, right? What will be the third one? Oh, as you can see, we have to create one doc type for each trigger. Maybe a good idea, maybe not. But I can't think of anything else. Can I? Hmm. Hmm. Anything? Anyone? If there is anyone listening in the chat. Okay. Okay, so for cron it will be you select scheduled scheduler event, and then you can select one of, you can just give it a cron expression maybe, but yeah, no, it's a link field, right? So cron, or let's take a simple example, daily, because now if you think, right, the other case for this thing is cron, and in that case it will require a cron expression as well, star star. Oh, that will be the parameters. Okay, that will be the parameters. So this can work, but then again this has to bring its own parameters. Listener has to bring its own parameters. So now I am thinking the other way around. When a document gets updated, how will we trigger the workflows that are linked to it? So we can do something like, I'm just writing pseudocode here. We'll do get all Hazel workflow, and we can filter enabled should be 1, and suppose sales invoice updated, right? And we will filter that whatever workflow is enabled and has a trigger of type document event. Again, see what we did, we miss. This also requires a doc type, right? What doc type you are listening to on update, right? And this thing requires, so as you can see, there are additional parameters with each trigger. Requires a cron expression. Okay, document. This can be listener, that's fine. Again, doesn't make sense because this is a completely different thing. This is auto generated for each workflow, and this thing is like a set of, okay. So let's see. Yeah, so we'll say trigger is doc type event, and doc type, how will we filter this? I don't know yet. We will do something. So let's break it down. Or we could have done this. This is the benefit of Hazelnode. We can copy this here. Enabled trigger doc type sales invoice. So whichever workflow is listening to this, right? Okay, so this might be a problem because workflow won't listen. Workflow has a listener that will listen and trigger the workflow. So workflow can be independent of the listener. But how will the user select the listener then? Okay, so if we don't think about linking the two, the listener and the trigger, we have something here. So in the UI to the user, it will look like they are just, it will look the same. They are selecting a node. But on the back end, it is not saved in the workflow at all. That is one more approach. Command enter. Other approach. No link between listener and workflow. Like yesterday, right? We in the listener knows about the workflow, but not the workflow. The other way around. So maybe this can work because this is little complicated. Okay. So doc type sales invoice. So event on update, right? So if we can just as easily filter this, like if we link the two, if we don't link, right, then there should be listeners that need to be configured. So we'll create a new doc type called, so we already have a doc type, maybe we can reuse. Markdown. Yeah. Other approach. So we have a listener type doc type, right? And in that doc type, we have the name, so it can be webhook cron webhook or document whatever we end up calling it. Right, you give it a name or third party, even Raven message receive. Okay. And then you can configure the listener as well. That's this is getting complicated. uh, so that config can be JSON, that's fine. So example, doc type event, what doc type and what event you are listening to, that's fine. Or maybe we can do this in Hazelnode type itself, right? Because it already has a name, it has the config, right? So if I go back, Hazelnode type, you see there is a kind. If we do trigger, handler path should not be required. So preview image and everything will remain. Parameters, this is what we were talking about, right? Okay. So we still need the trigger, right? But only to do this stuff. Okay, I have something in mind. Let's implement it quickly and then we can try it out. Maybe if it works, if it doesn't, we will refactor. So this should not be mandatory, but mandatory depends on eval. It will be mandatory when doc dot kind is equal to action. So if I go here, it is mandatory, but let's remove this one. Maybe it is referred somewhere. Let's create a new type. I will call it webhook listener. So it will be action, and also let's do display depends on. Okay, so for trigger it won't be visible, that's cool. API call, it will be visible. Nice. Let's create a new doc type. We'll call it Hazel, or we can call it webhook listener. It will be a trigger. Listens to webhook events. Hey Blender forever. And maybe it can take some, I don't know, check. Title will be, so I implemented this child table. So this is like doc field, but very simplified version of it. Secure with secret, something like that. Not implemented yet. Use secret. So we will render this in front end as a checkbox and you store that. Now it makes sense to leave it as is. Right, when they select a webhook listener, we have to handle this separately. Trigger params. Okay, let's do that. I'll go to Hazel workflow. I will add a few fields here. Let's add a section. Move it above trigger. Let's add a field. Link field. Trigger type. This will be a node type, right? Then let's add one more field. So one more field will be a JSON field. Oh, too big, but fine. Let's move this side, this side. Trigger params or trigger config, right? And this will be by default read only, and default value will be an empty object. Let's hit save. Let's go back. If you see now, the trigger type we can select. So let's apply a filter here that only it shows node types that are of kind trigger, so that we can do in JS easily. Hazel workflow.js frm.set query for trigger type where okay, come on, kind is trigger. Let's hit save, go back, refresh. If you see, okay, doesn't work. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I used set query wrong. I haven't used it in a long time. So let's refer to the manual. In the cookbook we have filtering link fields. Okay, and we have to say filters. See? Nice. Now only it will show trigger types and webhook listener. And in the config we can tell the name of the listener. Now everything is clicking. Let's see if it actually clicks and we can get it to working. In the config, I will just set it manually for now. We will figure out a way to do this automatically on save of the webhook workflow. Somehow we will do it. Don't worry, we'll do it. We'll somehow do it. I don't know how, but we'll do it. So webhook listener requires a name. Let's call it listener ID data webhook ID, we'll call it. And in the params, right, also let's make mandatory and non-mandatory. So for now I leave it. Let's leave it. So as you can see, in the config I can go to JavaScript console. I will say frm.set. I don't know if I am able to convey everything that I am thinking or not, but at least I am building live, right? So maybe you will pick some stuff off, maybe not everything, but that's fine. Trigger config. So it will make sense in some time, I don't know. I also watch myself at 2x. Sometimes it makes sense. A few times it doesn't, but yeah. So I will say it will be name will be, so let's pick a name from somewhere. webhook listener, this one, right? This will be the name. Okay. So now if you think about it, right? The workflow knows about the listener, and since it was generated from here, right, using this config, right, we can find that particular listener, webhook listener, like the listener can find it, whatever you want to think about it, but it will work. And if third party triggers come in, they can also be a node type, but in the sense that, okay, now we can delete this and we can remove the validation, right, that we added yesterday in workflow.py, this things. So instead of validating this stuff, we'll just validate trigger is required for non-empty, or trigger is required def. We refactored is basically, but this makes more sense to me and simpler. And now we can say just loop over all nodes. Why? Because earlier we are assuming the first one is the trigger node. Now it is natural that all nodes will be action nodes. That's it. And we'll also add one more validation. As you can see, removing two validations, adding two validation. Validate nodes. So I'll tell you why I created it. Just give me a minute. If self dot nodes, length of self nodes is greater than 0, and there is no trigger type, right? Frappe dot throw. So by default, it will throw a validation error, which is exactly what we want. Whatever. What was I doing? Trigger is required for the workflow. In the front end, we'll make sure they select the trigger first, so this condition won't be hit. And then we'll call self.validate nodes. Let's move this to the top. And this will be part of validate nodes. Okay. In here, I will say all nodes should be action nodes, right? So for node in self.nodes, let's take a quick break. Cool, I'm back. So we want to check if not node dot kind equal action frappe dot throw node dot, what is it, name must be an action node. Cool. So now this should trigger is required webhook listener, right? So if you even try to add it, we can also apply a filter script here as well. But if you even like bypass that, you will see, okay, name is should be title. So the user should know, right, what error they are facing. So what's the name itself? Oh, webhook listener must be an action node, right? And we can apply frappe.bold. I'm going to write a blog soon on writing better error messages. Node webhook listener must be an action node. Right, this should be. And you can even make it better. Enumerate. Sorry, enumerate. So this will give you an index node on row, right? On which row does this happen? Hash I plus 1. So let's say on row 2 must be an action node, right? This row 2 must be an action node. So if they remove it, then it's happy ever after. Cool. Now what? This is that. This can be useful. So we might need to at a later point in time. Let's keep a note of this. Later handling trashes deletes, right? Example, what happens to listener when workflow no longer requires it, and vice versa. Later, we just keeping a note. So we didn't go with this approach, and we also didn't go with this approach. So I think this was good enough. This is good enough. This select the trigger. I will handle it in front end, no worries. Easily can be done. But let's commit now. Refactor. Separate trigger from action nodes, right? That is what we did. And let's set that. Oh, come on. What? Oh no. This again. So you have to separately format this imports for some reason, I don't know. Okay, cool. Yeah, this was sophisticated, if I may. But at least now stuff works, looking good. And even when you think about it, right? What do you think, Pushpa? On schedule, like the config will be different and based on what it requires. So on schedule or cron will basically require cron expression. Right? So now the user, if he or she selects, right, cron here in the config, they will have to give something like this: expression cron tab. Let's copy this. See? So this will help us configure the trigger itself. And triggers are separate, by the way. So if listener is there, then it was something else, right? Okay, what's the next step now? So how do we pass this configuration, right? How do we pass this configuration down the triggers? And how will third-party triggers be implemented? Let's create a new folder here. We can do that. We'll call it triggers. This will be a Python package. And in there we will create our first, or we can store the code required for the trigger. And here I can move this Hazel webhook handler.py file. Tada, right? This is just one of the triggers. So all the trigger code now lives in the triggers. And I just need to update it in hooks.py. Here it will be hazelnode.nodes.triggers, right? Hazelnode. Hazelnode.nodes.triggers.hazel webhook handler.this. Okay, cool. Again, we refactored some stuff. Refactor, move. So as you can see, this is becoming complex in size. So it's better if we keep refactoring as we go. Otherwise, at the end, it won't be possible without a rewrite. So we should keep it clean from the start. This is not a small demo project we have done in the past. Cool. So let's try it before we hit commit, or let it go. Move. Separate triggers lib. That's it. Let's push the commits. But yeah, now I think we have a solid base, right? We have a solid base in order for us to work. So this node works. This also triggers the workflows with the context and everything. This will still work because we have encapsulated in such a way that. And what was the next thing? So webhook works, right? In terms of trigger, we trigger green check, sorry. Green check. Now we have to implement these two triggers before I go and start doing some stuff in the front end. Okay, no, before that, just think about it. If the listener needs some configuration, right, it can just fetch this from this linked doc type. So I think that is possible. That works. No need to worry about it. Document events. Okay, this should be easy. This should be not that hard. We have doc events hook. Framework has done a lot of stuff. This hooks.py file is so powerful. So star means all doc types, right? And you can listen to stuff. So on trash will be delete, on cancel for submittable doc type. General fact, developer said he would refactor code after making it work, and that's the last time he's seen that code. Yeah, that happens. So it is not that get the whole thing working. Like get a small some piece or POC working like we did, right? And we thought, okay, that might not be a good idea, so we went back, changed it, and change it in such a way that it's better, right? So that's the cycle you have to take. And we have not started writing tests yet. So as soon as this 1-2 episodes are over, right, we have some trigger nodes and we go to front end, we'll start doing unit tests as well. How much time do we have? We have 10 minutes. So let's do one thing. Let's implement this doc events trigger as well. So I'll create a new Python file. Now you know where to create a file, right? If you are a new contributor to Hazelnode, you can directly go to nodes and triggers, and you know that here is the all the triggers, code related to them. So I will call it Hazel document event handler handler.py, right? And in hooks we'll say for all doc types, right? Let's see what all events do we have. So on update, let's implement on update. For now, we'll implement others as well before insert this, that. So this will be, so now the task is to, whenever a to-do document is saved, so that will be our use case, right? Send an HTTP request. That is the webhook feature basically that framework has. I will write it down in my notepad. Okay, whenever to do is updated, trigger HTTP request or the workflow, and it will do whatever it wants with the doc that got updated. Cool. Two things: doc before update and doc after update, or the current doc. I don't know if this is a good way or not. So here's the thing: if something fails in our workflow, the doc type won't be saved. Okay, so there is this decision again. Do we call it on update? We can call it on update, but we have to somehow put the execution of the workflow in the background, not in the same thread as the running request. Let's give it anyways. Let's give it the handler first. Hazelnode.nodes.triggers.hazel document event handler dot, we'll write a method here. Frappe doesn't make sense to not import it. Def handle. I think the path name is long enough. Dot handle, readable, right? Document event handler dot handle, and this will give you two things. So let's go to framework. framework. Go to hooks.py file. Star on update clear doc type notification, right? So let's take one of this example, process workflow actions. We can take that as well. Doc and state. Okay. So this will get two things. Doc state, right? And let's check if there is a webhook. After rename, on cancel, on change. Oh, now I remember. Webhook is very tightly integrated in framework, because the trigger of this webhook, right? Okay. Yeah, let's see how far we can get to, and we have to refer to other tools now, how they handle. So document event is very specific to Frappe. So what doc was and what was the state? Can we do this? And let's just print. Okay, let's go to bench, restart bench. Okay, so let's create a to do sub. No, so this doesn't work. So I was expecting this to trigger on. Ha, I knew it. But yeah, at least we can get something working. So behind the scene I can, so on update, right? Maybe high. As you can see, to do, it gives the whole doc type, and then on update, and version on update. So wherever we are handling this, right, we can have a single handler here, right, for everything. On trash, right, create, read, update, delete. We'll add two more behind the scenes, but here you can check what was the state and which was the doc type, and based on that trigger the workflow. Cool. But this will be fine, good for today. We will figure this out later now. Bye bye.